The .NET Core podcast is supported by our listeners who have become patrons. To see a full list of the patrons, or to join them, head over to .NETCore.show/patrons. Hello everyone and welcome to the .NET Core podcast, an award-winning podcast where we reach into the core of the .NET technology stack and, with the help of the .NET community, present you with the information that you need in order to grok the many moving parts of one of the biggest cross-platform multi-application frameworks on the planet. I am your host, Jamie GaProgMan Taylor. In this episode, I talked with Sebastiaan Janssen about Umbraco 9, which is the first release of the CMS known as the Friendly CMS, built entirely in .NET 5 and ASP.NET Core. If you have ever submitted a PR to the Umbraco project itself, or have attended one of their official hackathons, then you'll likely have met Sebastiaan, as he manages all community PRs. Along the way, we talked a little about some of the unique challenges involved in managing a completely open source project, especially one with multiple active branches each targeting different .NET versions. We also discussed Sebastiaan's blog post about installing and running Umbraco 9 on a Raspberry Pi. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. So, thank you ever so much, Sebastiaan, for taking some time this afternoon to talk to us all about Umbraco. So I know there are three pronunciations of Umbraco. There's Umbraco, Umbraco, and Umbrago. So I apologize to everyone in the world for saying it wrong every single time.
It's all right. Everybody says it wrong, and that's the correct way to pronounce it, actually. There is a video on YouTube somewhere with all of the. There's 8 more pronunciations of it, so you can you can look it up.
Wow. Okay, that's amazing. I don't think I know of any other tool anywhere that has 8 pronunciations of the name. So maybe we can come up with a 9th one in this episode.
Oh yeah.
Excellent. But yes, thank you, Sebastiaan, for taking some time this afternoon. I was wondering, could you let the folks know a little bit about you, maybe an elevator pitch for Umbraco, or Umbraco, or any of the other pronunciations, so that then, because people may not, there's some people who work in .NET who don't know about it, right?
Yeah, so I am Sebastiaan. I work on the open source part of Umbraco CMS. I am jokingly called the head of PR, which doesn't stand for public relations, but for pull requests. And I am leading the team of community contributors. Oh, that's a hard word. Community contributors, which is a team of 5 volunteers who are helping me sift through any incoming pull requests for Umbraco CMS. They test them, they verify that the code is correct, and maybe if there's tests and things like that, they make sure that that it's safe to merge, and they actually merge their code into Umbraco, or other people's code actually, and they. There's a good team of contributors who regularly contribute to Umbraco. So for each release, we have at least about 20 to 30 people who are unique people who have actually contributed to the next release of Umbraco. So we're very much building Umbraco together with our community. Elevator pitch. I guess Umbraco is a .NET CMS, and actually a .NET Core CMS these days, since 2 weeks since we released Umbraco version 9. We focus on making the editing experience very friendly. So the end users who are actually going to be using the CMS should have the best experience possible building and updating their website. And then, of course, the second area we focus on is developers who are implementing the CMS, making that a nice experience for them as well, which has just gotten a lot nicer on .NET Core, or .NET 5 as it's called now, I guess. Other than that, I am based in Copenhagen, but originally Dutch. I am from Holland, moved here for the job about 9 years ago. I love cycling through Copenhagen, and it's a very pretty city. I'm looking forward to going to live concerts again. But until then, I will just brew some more beer, which I do in my spare time a lot.
There was I don't want to say old, but a marketing term that I've heard in the past for Umbraco is it's the friendly CMS.
The friendly, so that's how we market ourselves. Yeah, exactly. But it's not just marketing. We actually mean it. We have actually a very friendly community, and they are happy contributors, and we're also really happy to see each other in real life, which we're hoping to do again soon as well. This is actually why I came in to the Umbraco community quite early on. I'd been to conferences before, and I heard about this Umbraco thing. I thought I'd go to that conference and see what it was all about. And actually, within the first 5 minutes, I had the most interesting conversation I've had in my professional life with someone, and that just kept going for the 3 days the conference was on, and I never looked back. I've been all in on Umbraco ever since. So, yep. We're very happy bunch.
I have to say, I went to, it was definitely in the before times. I went to an Umbraco conference in London. It was a 2 or 3 day thing.
It was 2018.
Yeah, I think it would have been. May have been a little earlier. I know I went because I did a talk, and it was on what Blazor is and all that kind of stuff. And I have to say that the people that I met there were super friendly. You know, I'm not saying that there's unfriendly people at conferences, but like the people that I met there were just like, oh, hey, Jamie, let's have a talk. Let's talk about this.
Right?
Let's talk about
That's
that.
exactly it. Yeah, I've been to other conferences before where people just stay with their own little groups and don't talk to any of the other attendees. And this was just immediately, it was very, very friendly and welcoming. So, yeah. And we try to keep that up these days as well, even if we have to do it online sometimes.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Umbraco conferences, I've got to say. At least by that I mean the 2 that I've been to.
Yes.
And that's just, because life and, it was in the before times. But yes, I loved attending the hackathon that happened slightly before then, just talking about community contributions. So this is like my understanding of it, having been to it, was, everybody gets into a room and they're like, oh, hey, I have this idea for a bug fix or for a feature. Let's see if I can implement it in the next few hours. There's some Umbraco people there. There's some other people there who are going to help out. And then, as far as I remember, you're in the room just sitting there going, right, okay, merged. And there was like a counter, and you were saying, yeah, we've merged 17 pull requests today or something like that.
It's always so much fun to see people, to help people set up the Umbraco source code and get it up and running. And then to see the eyes go wide when they go, oh, I can actually change this, and it has an immediate effect. And I know where to find stuff, and now I know how to actually change anything else that I might encounter. It's super fun to see that light bulb go off, and then of course it's even more fun if people actually submit a pull request, and I'm sitting next to them, able to merge that pull request. Usually on these hackathons, you try to do something simple first, right? Like a spelling mistake or whatever. And it's super nice to give people that good feeling of, okay, now my change to Umbraco will live in the code base forever. It's in the Git history. I can see myself there. I've been an active contributor to this project. Super fun.
Yeah, it is.
Especially, this is my passion, actually. When I started with Umbraco, I found a bug, and I actually sent, this was way before, this was on Codeplex. So I sent them, I think I needed to add a patch file to a issue somewhere. I got no response for like a year. And I kept asking about it. It's like, hey, do you, my bug fix is really good. Do you want to put it in the core? And they were too busy. So, yeah, when I was hired, I made it my mission to make that experience a lot better. And, hopefully I've succeeded.
Yeah, most definitely. I can say for sure that when I was at those hackathons, I'm sitting there with my my MacBook Air, and this was in the the .NET framework timeline. So I was like, "There's not really much I can do, but I can help someone out if they need to." I remember I was looking through one of the PowerShell build scripts and trying to swap there were a number of hard-coded strings for paths, with like a backslash in place, and I was trying to replace a number of those with like directory or path.join or something like that, just to make it a little bit simpler. But I never got it finished, so I didn't
Oh,
submit it. So, but it's a wonderful experience to be sitting in a room full of 20, 30 people, and they're all going, "Oh, I've just fixed this," and then, like you say, you shouting up and going, "Oh wow, yep, just pull request complete," and just mark it off on the board. That was a really fun experience, I have to say.
yep. It's always very rewarding to have a room full of people who are actually trying to get stuff done, and they're actually getting things done. Super fun.
You mentioned there that you got started with Umbraco after sitting and waiting for a while with a pull request, or rather a patch file, and then having gone to a conference and started talking to some people. So that tells me you weren't there really from the beginning. I guess you haven't been Umbraco developer since the beginning of Umbraco, right?
Not since the beginning of Umbraco. I think I came in when version 4 was just released. This was in 2009. So I've been around for 12 years now. So it's been a while, and I got hired by Umbraco in 9 years ago. What's that? 2012? Yeah, 2012.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been around for a while, just not from the very, very beginning, indeed. I got hired to manage the core of Umbraco while also doing 50% of actual development on Umbraco itself. But we really needed a project manager who could set some deadlines and get some goals sorted, so that we wouldn't get distracted by all the shiny new things that we could also be doing. Yep, that's where my journey at Umbraco HQ started, at least.
That's pretty cool. So have you been a .NET developer since before then, or was it like, oh, there's this thing called .NET and there's a thing called Umbraco, let's learn them both at the same time?
I think I started programming when I was 12 or 13. I was QBasic, and I figured out that you can make the speaker make a sound, and I could build notes so you could actually make it sing a song, which was fun, but kind of silly. But it really took off for me when I discovered the internet, and GeoCities was there, and I copied and pasted HTML and JavaScript, and then got into, okay, let's do this PHP thing. That seems like it might be doing something interesting as well. So I started building my own little websites, and just self-taught, really. And then in 2005, I think, I landed my first actual developer job, where I was immediately forced to forget everything I'd learned, because this was in, and this is the worst, it was in VB.NET, and I had to learn Visual Studio. I was used to doing everything in Notepad++, like PHP, like you don't need to compile anything. So I had no idea what I was doing the first year. I think compiling in Visual Studio is a bit of a beast when you haven't seen it before. But yes, that was a bit painful, but once I got into it, it was nice. Then I discovered Umbraco through a colleague who's like, actually, the CMS that we're building is exactly the same as the one that they've done, but theirs is open source and better. So maybe we should look at this. And I agreed. Luckily, Umbraco was written in C#, so I quickly converted to. I don't know if I can say this, if this is bad, but to a real programming language.
No, I think that's allowed. I think that's allowed. I feel like all programming languages are real programming languages.
Yeah, true.
But yeah, it's always fun just to have a little laugh at a joke. That's not a problem.
Whatever gets stuff done, whatever works for you, I'm very happy with that. But I'm very comfortable in C#, and I really love using it now. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that your colleague had said, "Why should we build when we can, in bunny quotes, buy?" And by that I don't mean use currency, but the time to invest in it. There's often an argument of build versus buy, and it's not really something that I'd like to get into here, just because it's more of a software engineering question, I think. But yeah, it's something that I think a lot of teams I'm trying to put this as delicately as possible. There are sometimes you get developers on a team who are a little overzealous and think, yes, this has been done before, but I can do it better. And maybe you can. I'm not trying to say that you can't. But is it worth spending all of that development time if, like you say, someone has already solved this problem? And even better, it's open source. So you could just sort of not copy, but you know what I mean? It's not going to cost you, it's not going to have a physical monetary cost to it, right?
Exactly. I think actually in 2009, when I started there, open source and Microsoft was really kind of like polar opposites there. So it was kind of innovative that there was open source stuff happening on the Microsoft stack, and that made the company that I was working for a bit scared as well. So they actually went off and found a different product that they used instead of. They're also continuing to build their own. So yeah, I totally understand, and especially in the time of before of Umbraco, it was quite immature. It worked. It was really cool at what it did, but there was also like a lot of rough edges around it. And yeah, we've been polishing those rough edges for the past few years to make sure that we actually have a nice developer experience as well.
Yeah, I can understand the reservations that back then and still to a certain extent now, some project managers or clients or whomever may have with, but it's open source, because quite literally what happens if the developers stop working on it, right?
Exactly.
If you put all of your company, the stake of your company in the fact that this thing is here and is open source, and then it magically goes away, you know, what happens then, right?
Yep.
There are some efforts to stop those kinds of things. So like, stop that from happening, sorry. So like, you know, I happen to know that there is a commercial arm to Umbraco, and that, you know, Microsoft have set up things like the .NET Foundation in the hopes that if, like, for instance, if I'm working on some open source thing and I decide, right, I am done with this now, it is not complete, but I've done all that I can. I need to sort of leave this for now and the community can take over, then, you know, the idea is that there are different groups and organizations who can help with getting new people onboarded and the code shared to people.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it is a hard thing to do as well. I mean, even if you were to take on someone else's project, it is tough to get into a big project and make it your own and figure out if you actually want to support this. Luckily for Umbraco, we have done a few things to make sure that we have a future. So first of all, as you said, we have a commercial component. We have Umbraco Cloud, which is anything you want to do in Umbraco, you can do in Umbraco Cloud. You set up a project and you pay a monthly fee, and you get the beautiful open source CMS, plus all of the stuff that you don't need to do on servers and things like that. I'm not a salesperson, so I'll stop talking about this. But this is good for our continuity. Plus, when in 2009, when there was 4 people working on this project, yes, of course, it is a bit scary when there's 4 people and they might just drop out and go do something else. Right now, we've just completed about 100 people working at Umbraco now. So we're an actual company, and you can see that as well, that we actually have support staff and, you know, everything else that surrounds a software project.
So yeah, what you're saying is there's no need to worry. Come join the friendly CMS and see what you can build, right?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Thank you for being my salesman.
Like I say, I'm not a salesman either, but hey, let's say that that's the thing. I don't know. Okay, so one of the things that we've sort of touched on a little bit so far is that Umbraco now runs on .NET Core / .NET 5. And I guess because we're recording this early October, soon to be .NET 6, right? And I know that there is an episode earlier in the show's history, episode 46, I believe, from 2020, where I talked to Bjarge Berg about some of the plans for moving over to .NET Core. And I believe that was that must have been arranged shortly after I'd talked, because I remember at the Umbraco Festival in the UK down in London, I was sitting in a Q&A session with a number of engineers, and I said, you know, I put my hand up and said, "So, what can you tell me about .NET Core?" And they kind of went, "Nothing yet." Which is fair enough, right? Because the last thing that you want to do is say something in public about whether you are or aren't moving, and then that get taken out of context and blown up, put over the internet. So that's totally fine. So I fully understood that.
Yeah, I think at the time we were working on it, but we weren't sure what we could commit to. And actually, pretty soon after, we were really focused on, okay, this is what we actually can commit to. So yeah.
Sure, and that makes sense, right? You don't want to, if you're in a moment of uncertainty about whether you can commit, how much you can commit, engineering time or whatever, then yeah, you don't really want to announce that. So I'm not trying to say it was good or bad. I'm saying I fully agree with it, and that's perfectly fine. So it has now been migrated, or rather, there are parts of it that have been. Is it? Do you know? I mean, you may not know, but do you know whether it's a full? It now the whole thing runs on .NET Core 5, 6.
5 and 6 RC or whatever is available right now is working. So we have everything running that used to run in V8 of Umbraco, so the Net Framework version. In fact, this is one of our biggest struggles in the last year is people have been actively contributing to the Net Framework version of Umbraco, and we've been merging everything up to V9. So anything that comes in has been merged up to V9. So V8 and V9 have currently have feature parity. We have exactly the same back office look and feel. It all looks the same. So you wouldn't even be able to tell if you're on V9 if you look at it from the outside. This was one of the biggest struggles that we've had, especially when anything C# changes, then that needs to be slightly changed in the V9 branch, possibly. Most of the front end stuff stayed the same, so that was pretty easy to merge up. But I know that Bjarke has been cursing a little bit about some of the big merges that he's had to do with 200 merge conflicts in one merge. So yeah, that's been fun.
Yeah, I can understand that. And like you say, because it's an open source CMS and technically anyone could submit a pull request. You know, if you're submitting pull requests for version 8, then yes, there will be that headache of, right, okay, how do we bring this into V9? I remember something I was saying to, there's a question with Bjarke back in 2020 where it said, well, how are you, because this seems like it's a very difficult thing to facilitate, right? Because at that time, I believe there was active development for V8, or rather, there was some development going on in V8, and this V9 was being spun up. I don't think it was called V9 at the time, but keeping that in sync must have been presumably more difficult then than it is now. I mean, that's just, it's beyond my method of understanding how you all pulled this off,
yeah,
if I'm honest.
It's actually, it's been also a learning experience for us, of course. We haven't ever tried this before. But here's where we are known as the friendly CMS, and we're trying to do the friendly thing and not break too many things for too many people, so that they can actually eventually come along and migrate their websites up to V9 and not notice that much of a difference even in the code that they need to write, which was very important to us. So we wanted to make sure that everything was kind of the same, or at least we could explain the differences. Of course, there's a few things that we had to change. Something like membership providers doesn't exist in Net 5, so we had to fully go in on ASP identity or .NET identity. So those bits differ a little bit, but we've tried to keep our APIs quite similar so that people could understand where to look for the differences. And then of course the way you write views in Net Core is a little bit different as well. So those things need to be rewritten and updated. But still, there's not that much difference. If you look at it side by side, it actually looks quite similar. So it should be a familiar experience for people who have been using Umbraco before, and that's what we wanted to really work on to make sure that was facilitated for.
Do you know of, I mean, we've talked a little bit there about the sort of migration and keeping everything feature parity wise in sync. Were they the majority of the issues that you knew about, that you as a team knew about going in? Again, with the identity stuff, or is it, because I feel what I'm trying to get at is I feel like over the next couple of years there's going to be a lot of teams who go, oh wow. We've just been told to convert over from, to migrate from framework over to 5 or 6 or whatever the number of the time is, of that time is. Are there any that you know of? Are there any big gotchas that sort of leapt out and went, right, oh gosh, we didn't think of this, we didn't think of that?
Yeah, exactly. So I have not been super involved in the development process of V9. So I've looked at it from a little distance, and I kept seeing Bjarke smiling. So that's a good thing. So most things were actually very similar and pretty easy to port over. Of course, when some complete concept disappears, like membership providers, then you need to figure something out there. We had to do some things with image manipulation. We used image processor before, which is an image manipulation project. We had to switch that out for image sharp, which is there's a company called Six Laborers who's doing that. It's also an open source project. So there was things we needed to switch out, but that wasn't too bad. I think the one traumatic experience that Bjarke had very recently after we launched V9 was the the change from NSL to ICU, which is so whenever you deal with languages in .NET, let's see, the framework version was still using NLS, National Language Support, and the .NET Core version is using ICU, which is International Components for Unicode. This is fun. Especially if you're not Swedish, then it's fine. Then it works absolutely perfectly. Once you go to Sweden and you type the minus sign and you try to, so let's say you have -1 and you try to int parse that, you suddenly get a false instead of a true in try parse, of course, because the minus is slightly different in Sweden, and it's not actually a number or a part of a number. So we learned that the hard way. Some of our querying in the database looks for things that start with -20, -21, and that just that stopped working. So we've had to update those things to do the right thing, and we're actually forcing everything to the new ICU now, so that it will all be the same on all operating systems as well. So not just Windows. Windows also has differences, by the way. So Windows 8 does NLS, Windows 10 and 11 does ICU, or some Windows 10 and 10 versions. I don't know. It was very interesting. So that's a huge gotcha that you need to look out for. Once you get past that one, though, it was not so bad. So yep, and then of course I mentioned merging. If you are still supporting both the framework and core somehow, then merging stuff or doing so what some of our plugin developers do, they're actually multi-targeting now. So they're actually having if-def statements in their code to check if we're on .NET Core or not, and actually doing something a little bit different, which is surprisingly. It works surprisingly well. That's the only thing that we were very afraid of, that our plugins would all fall behind because they would take months to redevelop. But just adding some detection of framework in there is actually working for them, and it works quite well.
I think that's a wonderful boon, I guess, for the team who create the compiler and the runtime. Just to be able to just throw in a if-def this version of the framework, if-def .NET Core, if-def.f5 or whatever, that feels like a really good idea, because otherwise you're having to compile multiple versions, right?
Yeah, that's actually the most important part, is that you don't have to compile different versions, which was going to be hard. So if you're a plugin developer and you have a version 8 out of your plugin, and people are trying to install that in the .NET Core version, obviously won't work, and the other way around definitely will not work. Will work either. So there was a huge conflict coming up right there, and most of them have actually solved it by multi-targeting and just like, no, version 10, whatever. Yeah, it works in both Net Framework and Net Core. Don't worry about it. Just install it. So super nice.
Excellent. I do like that because, one of the things I like to do with this show is to collect some helpful hints for people who are going to be moving over. I believe it was Scott Hanselman who said, the enterprise is a bit like an oil tanker. It will migrate over, but it will take some time. And that's both a good thing and a bad thing. But I guess it's a good thing because it gives those developers who are working on enterprise things some time to actually look at how other people have solved these problems, right? And then it becomes, I don't want to say easier, but less difficult to migrate over. And I think that's a good thing. And I think sharing that information is a wonderful way of helping those people out, right?
Not just enterprises, but the same goes for us. We have tried the versions 2 and 3, I think, and we couldn't really get there in the end. And it was only when .NET 5 was released that we were like, okay, now it's smooth enough to move to a new framework. So yeah, we've had to wait as well, and of course we were a small team at the time, and we couldn't spend all the resources that we have had this time around. So yeah, I think .NET 5 is great. It comes at a perfect time. I think people will find it surprisingly nice to move over to, actually.
So one of the other things that I'd love to talk to you about is recently, at the time of recording, you'd written a blog post about, hey, guess what? I've just got Umbraco, the .NET friendly CMS, running on a Raspberry Pi. So I'd love to talk to you about that. Where did the idea for trying that out come from? Was it just a case of, hey, it runs on Linux, right? Raspberry Pi runs Linux as well. Let's just do it, see what happens.
Basically, yes. One of our community members, Carl, did this. He started installing Umbraco on a Raspberry Pi, which is a crazy idea. Why would you run software, .NET software on a Raspberry Pi? But yes, because you can. That's the answer. And he got it as far as it runs. Everything works absolutely fine, but you need a SQL Azure database to link to, and I found there was a bit of cheating going on there. I'm like, wouldn't it be nice if it was self-contained on the Raspberry Pi without having to rely on an external service? So yeah, I started investigating that, and it turned out to be really difficult. So I got stuck for a few weeks there until someone told me that SQL Edge is a thing, and SQL Edge is basically meant for IoT devices, and it's a Docker image that works on ARM. It's the only SQL Server version that works on ARM. And surprisingly, it actually runs and it looks like a real SQL Server. I had the most frustrating weekend. The first time I tried this out, I was doing this on my Raspberry Pi 4 with, I think this one had 2 gigs of RAM. And I just kept getting errors and errors. I'm like, I am not a Linux person, so I'm probably doing it wrong. So I kept Googling what I was doing wrong. Until I realized that finally I got into Docker logs. And finally I realized, I just don't have enough memory to do this. So I found my other Pi that had 8 gigs of RAM laying around, switched it out, started all over again, and finally the SQL server started running, and that was the amazing moment of like, okay, SQL server is running. Okay, now I can do anything I want. And then, indeed, 5 minutes later, Umbraco was installed and actually running on the Pi. Of course, then I am a little bit weird. I wanted to take it a little bit further. I'm like, okay, what can we do next? I want this to sit in my office next to me and run an actual website that people can visit. So to go back to SQL for a second, the hardest part there was to actually create a database. You don't get SQL command on the ARM version, so I had to also figure out, okay, how do I then do anything? Had to connect to SQL Management Studio from Windows to the Pi. stuff with firewalls. That was also interesting, getting them opened up, but not too bad. Actually, the Docker image makes sure that it opens up ports quite well, so that worked. So I got it running as a service. So Docker starts as a service. Umbraco website Kestrel starts as a service. That's great. So I could reliably reboot the thing. That was also a big win. And then the final key of the puzzle, which I didn't know the word for it. Of course, I wanted it to be online on the internet. The problem is that I am at an office here, which is a shared office space with about 150 other companies. And of course, they won't let me fiddle with the firewall and open up port 80 for me. That would be a big ask. So I needed to figure out how to bypass all the firewalls here. Which is finally when I tweeted out, okay, what can I do here? And someone pointed me to something called Cloudflare Tunnel, which is a service you run on any computer. It connects to Cloudflare. It's free. Cloudflare, you can map ports on your Raspberry Pi in this case to a port in the public internet and point your DNS at it. And it was 5 minutes of work, and it just worked, which was amazing. So now I have, I have a Raspberry Pi laying around here with a website on it that you can actually hit, and it works. And my colleague Warren tried to DDoS or at least DOS it. He sent a bunch of traffic to it. Of course, some traffic was too much. I think he got up to about 100 requests per second, which is very acceptable for a very low-power device for it to accept 100 requests per second and it still be running. So, yep, that was my journey of getting the Raspberry Pi connected to an internet.
That's amazing, because I can kind of imagine instead of, like, if you were to sort of self-host Umbraco, in the past you would need, a server, and it would, in the .NET Framework timeline, it would need to be running Windows.
Yep.
So there would be a cost there of a Windows license, right? But you also need relatively strong hardware, not because of Umbraco, but because there's a lot going on. There's Windows, there's .NET Framework, there's Umbraco, there's SQL Server, all sitting on the same box. Or even if you split your SQL Server onto another box, there's quite a lot there, right?
Yeah.
But now I can kind of see a situation where you might go, you know what, I'll get 4 Raspberry Pis, I'll get 12 Raspberry Pis, I'll get a bunch of, or indeed, any other sort of IoT single board computer, get a bunch of these together, put a Linux on there, put some .NET Core on there, .NET 5 on there, put Umbraco on there, put SQL Edge on there, put something in front of it so that we can, load balance between those. And hey, you've got yourself a low-powered web server compared to how much you would have had to have paid in the past, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's one of the things. I mean, we don't officially support anything but Windows at the moment, because we don't have the capacity currently to test everything. But everybody who's been using Umbraco before but was hating Windows is like, I am going to try it anyway. So all of the wonderful Mac people and all of the wonderful Linux people have been trying it out. Of course, we found some casing problems, so file names that were not in the correct casing, which we were expecting, and they've been slowly fixed over the past few weeks. So it's running pretty well now, and without any real problems. And then now we want to, of course, look into new storage options. So not just SQL Server, but let's see if we can do something with SQLite or whatever we can fit in there to make it even easier for these kinds of setups as well. Because SQL Server is not doing all that much for Umbraco. We're basically doing reads of content that goes into a cache. Of course, content editing means you need to do some writes, but it's nothing very heavy. So we don't need all the power of that beast of SQL Server at all. If we can do it in some lighter database that's also Linux or Mac native, fantastic. We would love for that to be a thing.
Sure. I'll just quickly point out to anyone listening in, that's not you saying Umbraco is definitely going to support these other platforms. That's you saying you're looking into it, right? Just in case someone takes what you said and went, "Oh my goodness, it'll be running on MariaDB or it'll be running on Postgres." It's like, no, they're just experimenting, right? Just like how we all experiment, right?
Yes, no commitments at the moment, but we're definitely going there. We need to be able to support it, and it's definitely also going to be a thing for people who want to do hosting cheaper, and those kinds of scenarios are really important for people. So, yep.
Sure. Okay. So we did have a question from Paul from cochair.co.uk. I know that he's a.
Hello, Paul.
Yeah, yes, he's very, very famous in the in the Umbraco community, and also quite famous on TikTok. I hear Paul from TikTok, we call him. So he said. So I think you've already answered one of his questions, and that was, what model of Raspberry Pi are we talking? Because obviously, because it has that SQL requirement, it'll have to be the one with the most RAM, right?
Yeah, so it's the one. So it's SQL or the Raspberry 4 with 8 gigs of RAM, and I don't know, of course, but in this case, I couldn't use the default Raspberry OS that comes with it. I actually needed to install a full Ubuntu version on it as well. That the Ubuntu version that works for ARM. And that's one thing you can choose when you set up your Raspberry Pi. There's an installer that you can download at the Raspberry Pi website. You can choose which distribution you want to run on it, and this was the official Ubuntu distribution that was made for the Raspberry. And that one just does all the things.
So, as you were saying earlier, you're not Umbraco at the moment aren't supporting this as a deployment option, but I like that there is an option to, although it's not supported. Hey, let's hack around and see if we can get it working, right? And my other question was going to be, which operating system and which bits of software are you running? But I think you answered that, right? With
well, it is Ubuntu, but it is the server version, so everything is unfamiliar to Windows people. It's all command line, and that's it's interesting to copy paste stuff from random blogs to see if you can get it working without really knowing what it's doing. But you get there in the end.
I think that's one of the things that they in bunny quotes teach you not to do when you start looking into Linux-based operating systems. It's not just copy paste it in, but hey, if it gets you to solve the problem.
Look, this is a hobby project. I don't care if it breaks or anything. But yes, if you're doing something important, you need to find someone who's good at Linux administration and not just copy paste random strings.
Sure. And like you say, because it's an experiment, it's that's fine. That's not a problem. Excellent. Okay. So let's just talk about that for a second then. So you got the Ubuntu for installed on the Raspberry Pi. You presumably did a let's install the .NET runtime, and then was it just a case of I guess you would have needed the SDK as well, and just .NET New Umbraco? Was that almost quite literally it?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So luckily, Microsoft has become much better at documenting their stuff, and it was literally going to the Microsoft website saying .NET and install .NET. They give you the instructions to do it on Ubuntu, even version specific, and copying those strings and executing them. It was a 1-minute job to get .NET running, and then you do. We have some .NET templates for Umbraco, so you can install Umbraco easily. So you do .NET New Umbraco, give it a name. You can even give it a connection string if you already know one, and then it starts running. It was at most 5 minutes of work to actually get that going.
Wow. Can you imagine that? So let's just do a thought experiment, right? Rewind back to 2009. And somebody says to you, hey, there's this thing called Mono, which allows you to run .NET on a Linux machine. do you want to try and get Umbraco running on a Linux machine running Mono?
Yep. People have tried, by the way, and failed quite miserably, unfortunately. I am super amazed by all of this, by the way. I have another spare laptop laying around on which I installed Ubuntu just on the whole machine. It is literally running Microsoft Edge, SQL Server, a full SQL Server, JetBrains Writer, it's VS Code. I have GitHub Desktop running on that, and it feels like almost feels like a Windows environment if you look at it. So all of this is amazing, and in the last few years it's been possible by all the wonderful work that Microsoft has been doing to fully support all of this.
Yeah, I can foresee, if it hasn't happened already, a lot of .NET developers going, well, let's try out this Linux thing then. What is a Linux and how do I download it? And sort of playing around with it. Because why not, right? If it works there. Because, I've been a Linux user since around 2008, right? And my biggest problem was, I want to do .NET stuff. Stuff. It just wasn't possible until around 2016, 2017. And that's not to say that that Mono was in any way inferior. A lot of the time it felt like it was, okay, write your .NET code in a Mono environment, then do a bunch of wizardry, and maybe it will work.
Yeah, and the best thing about it now is that it works consistently exactly the same way across any operating system, which is super nice. You don't have to learn anything new if you already know the one thing. So perfect.
Exactly right. It's almost a perfect example of pick the tool that works for you, and then build the software on top of it. Right.
Yeah, we have a lot of Mac people doing. Any CMS has a lot of Mac people because they like their Macs, designers and Photoshop and all those kinds of things. And all the Mac people are super interested in running Umbraco on their Macs. I'm actually not sure if it works on the M1. Does it?
So as far as I'm aware, .NET Core /5/6. .NET Core and 5 doesn't work on M1, but .NET 6 will.
6 will, that's it, yes.
That's my understanding, yep.
Good, so we only have a few more months to go. I guess when this is released, it might be out.
Yeah, by the time this episode comes out, you're listening to this, listener, .NET 6 should, as long as the release date doesn't slip, and Microsoft are pretty good about not slipping release dates, it should be able to run on your M1 without any, because I think there are some sort of unsupported hacky ways of getting it running. But obviously, if you want the it works, then you wait for .NET 6, right?
Fantastic. Well, we're ready. We've already started a V10 branch, of course, and installing .NET 6 RCs on there to make sure that everything still works. That's going to be. We're actually linking up with Microsoft's long-term support version. So Umbraco version 10 will be long-term support together with .NET 6 long-term support. So it'll be out soon after Microsoft is ready with .NET 6. So all the Mac people can rejoice.
Awesome. That must be good then for your, like you say, you have a number of designers or user interface people who are happy with working on a Mac. Perhaps a bunch of them are already running M1 and they're like, hey, I've got an M1 Mac and you are doing Umbraco stuff. I want to be able to run it locally so I can make my designs happen in real time. And that is just something that can happen from November onwards, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for now we've actually only talked about existing Umbraco users, but we now suddenly have an enormous amount of people who suddenly can use and develop on Umbraco on anything they want. They don't have to choose Windows anymore or have a VM running or whatever. So it's going to be really good for our number of users. We hope.
Interesting thought experiment that just happened in my brain. None of this is me tying Umbraco or yourself or anyone down to a definitive answer, but a stupid thing that just happened in my brain is Umbraco on a smartwatch? Umbraco in Blazor?
Haha. Who knows? Yeah. I have no experience with any of that, so you tell me if it's possible.
Why not? Anything's possible, right? Let's see what we can do.
I'm sure.
Again, none of that is supported by Umbraco. That's just me making a silly observation. But why not, right? Let's see if someone can get it going.
Absolutely.
I wonder if there's someone out there who can make Umbraco work on the default Raspberry Pi operating system. I wonder what it is that's not quite there. I'm sure that with more eyes on it now, there'll be a way of figuring out what's missing, right?
I actually never tried. The only reason I went to Ubuntu was because our community member Carl did it. I don't know if he tried, actually. So it might actually be possible.
Maybe. I know that there is the distribution of Linux that I use on one of my Raspberry Pis is called Diet Pi, and the idea is that it's sort of stripped down and it has its own sort of application selector. I may try and get it running on that. Why not, right?
Yeah.
And then I can say, hey, I got it running, or hey, I didn't get it running. But guess what? A failure is still a success because it's like, here's a reason why it doesn't work. And then I can maybe futz with it and see if I can get it working.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess all of these distributions are Debian based anyway, so they should be fairly compatible with each other. So yeah, it's worth a try.
Yeah, right. And I think that's another thing that, especially for .NET developers who haven't been in the Linux world, is that Linux isn't an operating system. It's the kernel of an operating system. And there's like distributions of Linux with other stuff thrown on top. So, you said Debian there. So Ubuntu is a Debian based distribution. There's Arch Linux. There's, Slackware. There's Gentoo. There's 100 billion gajillion different Linuxes. So why not try it out, right? I tell you what, if one listener tries out a Linux VM on their machine and throws Umbraco 9 on there and just gives it a go, let's see what happens, what works and what doesn't, right? It'd be brilliant.
It'd be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be very curious to hear back from that.
Excellent. Sebastiaan, where's the best place for people to find out a little bit more about you and definitely to find out more about Umbraco and things like that? Where's the best places?
Yeah. Well, obviously, Umbraco.com would be the place to go if you want to know anything about Umbraco. If you go to umbraco.com/blog, you'll see my face sometimes as well. I work mostly on community contributions, so that's where my blog posts will be focused. I am on Twitter. You can follow me at Cultiv, CULTIV, is where I tweet, and that's probably where you'll find me most. And cultiv.nl is my blog as well, where you will find the description of how I got Raspberry Pi running.
Excellent. What I'll do is I'll put those links into the show notes. That way, if you're driving to work, you don't have to dive over the dashboard to type them into your phone or write them down or something. Focus on what you're doing, folks. Don't worry about where are these links. They'll be in the show notes, so you don't have to worry about them.
There you go. Perfect.
Excellent. So, Sebastiaan, thank you ever so much for talking Umbraco with us.
Pleasure.
I'm actually recording this now on a Linux machine, so I'm very interested to go ahead and try and get everything running. I do know the aforementioned Paul Seal had sent me a bunch of commands to get it up and running, and we failed only because I don't have a SQL instance on here, but SQL for Linux is available in Docker, so maybe I could just throw that on here tonight and give it a go and get it up and running. Who can say?
Paul has a handy blog as well where he has been collecting snippets to paste into his Linux instance. So he might have a SQL one in there for you as well.
Awesome. I'll have to give it a try. Excellent. Well, like I said, Sebastiaan, thank you ever so much for spending some time with us today. I really appreciate it.
Very welcome. That was fun.
That was my interview with Sebastiaan Janssen about Umbraco 9, the fact that it runs on .NET 5, and running a .NET-based CMS on a Raspberry Pi. Be sure to check out the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .NETcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .NETcore.show/subscribe for ways to do that, or reach out via our contact page. That's .NETcore.show/contact. And to come back next time for more .NET goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks. .NET Core Podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.